I don't think we can just leave to one side the question of that remarkable social media post by Donald Trump earlier in response to the murderous attack by Russia on civilians in the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. Just to remind ourselves, I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv. Not necessary. And very bad timing, Vladimir. Stop. And then he goes on, 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get the peace deal done. It's just rather strangely phrased, isn't it? Where is the real pressure on Russia just now? We talked yesterday with a Trump loyalist who believes this is all part of his negotiating style and we will get a deal. But tonight I want to check in with Fred Fleitz, the former executive director and chief of staff at the National Security Council in the first Trump administration, and the man who had put together a previous Ukraine deal which Trump rather liked. Fred, great to have you on the show again. Thanks for doing this. Can I ask you, first of all, there appears to be almost no pressure on Russia as we look from the outside. Do you think internally there is a pressure being applied?
Andrew, good to be here. I believe there is pressure. I think this is a negotiating tactic. And I believe that President Trump is, frankly, quite angry with the Russians that they have not kept their agreements since the negotiations began. They've accelerated the war. They keep killing Ukrainians. And frankly, they're disrespecting President Trump. And I think that's been communicated to Putin.
We've also had this intriguing suggestion leaked to the press that Putin is prepared to freeze the line of advance, as it were, give up on his entire territorial demands in return for America saying, actually, in the end, Crimea is Russian. That's a much tougher proposition than the one that you put to President Trump last year. What do you make of it?
Well, it is. It appears that there is some type of final offer by the Trump administration. I think that's actually where these things really lie, in which the U.S. would recognize, maybe not legally, Russia's occupation of Crimea and some type of de facto recognition of the territories it seized in the east to stop the war. And that's going to be a really hard thing for the Ukrainians to accept. I understand that. But if there was a way to get an agreement that Russia would actually comply with, that would stop the war, that would be verified by international observers, I know this would be distasteful and it appears to reward Russian aggression, but I don't see a lot of alternatives to stop the killing right now. Yeah. And if we can get the Russians to abide by this, I think we should go with it.
Well, it's very interesting you used the word legally there, suggesting it wouldn't, because as I understand it, it would require a change to the Ukrainian constitution to cede the Crimea, and that can't happen without a referendum, and they can't have a referendum while the war is going on. So legally, as it were, Zelenskyy is entirely right to say this is something we can't even discuss. But you're suggesting some kind of nod and a wink, under the counter kind of deal could be the way through.
Well, the agreement appears to concern how America will regard this territory that Russia illegally seized. Now, when Zelenskyy objected to this, President Trump said that the U.S. is not asking Ukraine to recognize Crimea as Russian territories. I think that was interesting. So there may be some wiggle room here on what Ukraine's actual view of this situation is.
That's very, very interesting. When it comes to sort of the final settlement, how important is the minerals side to Trump, do you think? In other words, does he see a kind of win-win commercial deal being underpinning this?
It's an important issue for President Trump. I frankly don't think it has much to do with the final settlement. I think it is an offer by Zelenskyy, a good faith offer to give Trump something that he wants. But realistically, if there are rare earth minerals in Ukraine, they'll take many years to develop. I know some people think this is a form of confidence building or maybe some weird form of peacekeeping. I don't see it that way, but it is something Trump wanted, and I think Zelenskyy is trying to keep Trump on board.
Fred, I've had a couple of people on the show this week who say to me, do you know what? Actually, below the bonnet, as it were, Russia is in terrible trouble. The economy is tanking and they can't carry on forever. If Ukraine can hold out for a year, Ukraine can still win this. Now, from my perspective, just looking at the size of the forces on both sides, that seems laughable. But do you think it's true?
No, I think that's wishful thinking. I think Putin is prepared to fight until he wins if he has to. I think Ukraine will be out of troops and resources long before that happens. I know there's people who would like to justify not giving in to Putin and arguing if we simply keep arming Ukraine, somehow it will prevail. I'm sorry, that's not going to happen. Ukraine's had some significant losses over the last few months. They're going to get worse because of a manpower shortage. So folks who are telling you that on your program, they are mistaken.
They're mistaken. Well, that's really interesting. And finally, it's a question of face, I suppose, for President Trump. He has said he will get this peace deal done. And now his people are saying if he doesn't get it done, J.D. Vance was saying America will walk away. Wouldn't walking away from this do huge damage to American prestige and influence around the world?
Well, General Kellogg and I made it clear in the article you mentioned earlier, which had ideas on how to end the war, that this war might not be solvable. This war is Joe Biden's fault. Biden's incompetence sort of encouraged Putin to invade Ukraine. So if this fails, this is Biden's failure. Trump is doing the best he can to solve it. But if we had real leadership over the last 4 years, this invasion wouldn't have happened.